Platanino. I'm a member of the Worcester County Bar Association, and it is our pleasure to introduce all of you in the audience and our candidates to Central Massachusetts. We know campaigning is hard, so we really appreciate hearing from you about the issues that matter to us. To begin our program, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pedraja, president of Quinsigamond Community College, who has partnered with us to host this debate.
Thank you. They gave me a handheld mic because they know I like to move around and not stand still. I'd like to welcome everyone here on behalf of Quinsigamond Community College. It is an honor and a pleasure to be hosting the debate, and it is an important piece of the work we do. I always like to say that community is at the heart of our name. We are a community college, and the community we serve is essential. And part of the work that we like to try to do and to looking at our building of the community is to support community engagement, civic engagement for everyone in this area. So it is an honor to be able to welcome the Bar Association, members of the audience, and our next Attorney General. I don't know which one of you, but I can say with confidence that we have the next Attorney General of Massachusetts in the room. So I feel very comfortable in saying that. The work that you do is critical. I really believe that it's important even for the students that we serve and the populations that we serve, because you advocate for the rights of people in the state, you advocate for the state, and you also look at the future of how we're going to interpret and apply the laws. So I really am appreciative of your willingness to be here and glad to be a co-host. So welcome and good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Pedraja. Exactly under 5 minutes.
I didn't want you to tackle.
Some logistics. Restrooms are towards the back and to the right. We will be live streaming this, so kindly don't go until there's the front. We will, the forum, we will have the opportunity to have 2.5-minute opening statements. After that, we will go ahead, our panel will go ahead and ask you questions for a certain amount of time. After that, you will have the opportunity, again, for a 2-minute closing statements. There will be no rebuttal unless we find that is necessary. And you will have 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds to respond. In the front, we have Kevin Gold, the General Counsel for the Worcester County Sheriff's Office, who will be our timekeeper. And I have the opportunity now to introduce our illustrious panel. We have Ruby Waubu, the Assistant District Attorney Office of Worcester County, followed by Darren Griffiths, partner of Murphy & Rudolph, followed by Adrian Angus, Public Defender for the Committee for the Public Counsel Service. Ruby?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Worcester County Bar Association, Quinsigamond Community College, and the entire Worcester community, would like to give you a warm welcome to our candidates today. So can we get a warm welcome? Now, we diligently came up with a process to pick who gets to start first. And it involved putting names in a bucket. So, we're going to ask each of our candidates to give their opening statements. And based on our diligent choosing of the names, we are going to start with Mr. J. McMahon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I'm James McMahon, and I'm running to be your next Attorney General. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm married to my wife, Shelley, who's here in the audience, and I'm the father of 5 children. I was born in the town of Bourne, where I attended public schools, and where as a young man I volunteered for the Massachusetts Army National Guard and became a second lieutenant in the military police. I also entered law enforcement and became a police officer. I received my Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from UMass and my law degree from Suffolk University in Boston. In the military, I was trained to command a battalion-size unit, which is over 1,000 personnel. After the military, I've been employed in management positions with huge organizations on Cape Cod, such as Scudder Taylor Oil Company, Cape Cod Bank and Trust, and Cape Cod Hospital, where we had over 1,000 employees. And so I have management experience in large organizations. For the last 35 years, I've been a trial attorney in every level of court in Massachusetts, state and federal, and before many federal, state, and municipal boards and commissions. I've enjoyed the practice of law, and I have a vast experience in almost every area of the law. I'm running for Massachusetts Attorney General because I believe that all Americans have the right to public safety, the rights granted under our constitutions, and to be free from government infringement with political agendas. I will enforce the law, and so that all citizens can enjoy their individual pursuits in their education, occupation, religion, and enjoyments of life. I believe that black lives do matter in this country. I want to see everyone achieve the American dream. I'm concerned about the crime waves that have been affecting our minority neighborhoods. I believe that all of our neighborhoods deserve the same level of public safety, and to that end, we must advocate for law enforcement resources where they are needed the most. I stand with minority community leaders, all of whom are calling for more law enforcement, not less. I will never support a defund the police movement. In fact, the statistics are compelling that we must increase our law enforcement personnel and resources and use them productively. I'm Jay McMahon, and I'm running for Massachusetts Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to Mr. Quentin Palfrey.
Good afternoon. I'm Quentin Palfrey. I'm a proud Democrat running for Attorney General. I'm proud to have the endorsement of the Democratic Party in this race, and I'm proud of being from Worcester County. My dad was the chief of pediatrics at St. Vincent's Hospital, and I spent a lot of time in Worcester growing up. As a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact the people's lawyer can have on Worcester County and people all across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. When Trump was in office, it was inspiring to see the AG fight back again and again and again against a corrupt and immoral administration. But now more than ever, with our fundamental rights under attack in the U.S. Supreme Court, with our democracy literally under attack, we need the AG to stand up and lead on the really big challenges we face. Racial injustice, the climate crisis, attacks on our democracy, attacks on workers' rights and abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, housing costs and gun violence, student loan debt. We've got a lot of work to do. I was the first chief of the healthcare division in the Attorney General's office at the time that we were implementing Massachusetts health reform. And we worked really hard to make sure that everyone had access to high-quality, affordable health care. As AG, I'll fight for Medicare for all. I'll also fight for an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. I had the great honor to serve in the White House under President Barack Obama as senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness. I went back into the federal government on day one of the Biden administration, led a team of several hundred lawyers, and helped to launch the Build Back Better agenda. As Attorney General, I'll fight for an economy that works for everyone, take on wage theft and Uber and Lyft trying to misclassify workers. I'll fight for a fair share amendment so those at the top will pay a little bit more so that we can invest in transportation and in education, because our trains shouldn't be on fire and where you live shouldn't determine what kind of an education your children get. We have to stand up against racial injustice in other ways, too. The murder of George Floyd and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that there are two justice systems in America. We have to move urgently towards taking on the climate crisis, stand up against attacks on abortion rights, fight against special interests, and protect our communities and families from gun violence. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to Shannon Lis Rearden.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the Worcester County Bar Association for having us tonight. I'm very grateful to be here. My name is Shannon Lis Rearden. I'm very proud to be running to be your next Attorney General. I have spent my entire legal career, more than 23 years, intentionally taking on the biggest challenges and delivering big results for my clients, working people. For more than 23 years, I have represented workers and unions, and I have made national headlines leading teams of lawyers taking on some of the largest corporations in America. And time and again, we have beaten the odds and won against corporations like Starbucks, FedEx, Uber, Amazon, IBM, my alma mater, Harvard University, which I've proudly sued at least 4 times. I have represented all types of working people, waitresses, truck drivers, construction workers, janitors, Uber drivers, strippers, and helped them recover more than $500 million that corporate America stole from them. In the process, I have helped shape and strengthen the laws across Massachusetts and the country to protect workers' rights, and I am so excited about putting my 20-plus years of experience working effectively as a private attorney general to work with the power of the state behind me, with the hundreds of attorneys general at the AG's office. And as you're considering what you're going to do in this race, who you're going to support, I ask you to consider this race to be what it is, and it's a job interview. I urge you to put my resume side by side with each of the other candidates on this stage and ask yourself, who would you hire to be your lawyer? Because this is a very important position where we need an experienced, seasoned attorney who knows how to take on the legal challenges and lead teams of lawyers to victory in light of the incredibly complex legal landscape we have in front of us, particularly with the horrible decisions the Supreme Court has issued this term to pull apart our rights on the federal level. So think about it. Think about what many of you members of the bar do every day, and that is what I do. And ask each of us, ask yourselves and ask us, how many jury trials have you won? I'm the only candidate in this race who's won the jury trials, who has argued and won the appeals. I've drafted complaints. I've negotiated and finalized settlements. That's the work that I've done every day for the last 23 years. I have fought and I have won for working people, and I look forward to working for you and winning for you as your next Attorney General. Thank you so much.
And now, Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, and thank you to the Bar Association for hosting us. Thank you, of course, to the college and your leadership. I'm obviously Andrea Campbell and a candidate for Attorney General in this race, and really proud to be here with all of my opponents as well, who are also, of course, in the race. I jumped into the race really recognizing a few things, that residents right now are struggling. They are worried about housing affordability. They're absolutely worried about the Supreme Court, and if you are not, I'm concerned about you. You should be worried about the Supreme Court. They're concerned about violence. They are concerned about human trafficking, which just came up, uptick in hate crimes. They're concerned about mental health, the epidemic of mental health, not only in the context of adults, but also young people. They're concerned about consumer protection, the uptick in scams in our elder community, our immigrant community, and so much more. So I have been stressing, and I think we're all here to stress this, how important this race is during this moment in time. And there are great candidates in the race, but I think there are some distinctions that make me very different. I have related to many of the challenges that residents have faced every single day. I had a childhood filled with incredible instability. When I was 8 months old, my mom died in a car accident going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. My father and my brothers cycled in and out of the prison system, and my twin brother, Andre, would die 10 years ago as a pretrial detainee while in the custody of the Department of Correction as a result of receiving inadequate health care. All of my biological parents are deceased. All of my biological grandparents are deceased. Yet every single day, I make the choice to turn that pain into purpose. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I went to Princeton undergrad. The first in my family to go to law school. I went to UCLA for law school. But I didn't want to just break these cycles of poverty and incarceration for my family and my 2 beautiful boys. I sought to do the same for every resident in Massachusetts. I started my career at a local nonprofit representing families for free in education cases, especially students with disabilities, holding charter schools, traditional public schools, all types of school systems accountable to delivering a high-quality education for our children. I've worked as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick. I've also worked as a general counsel at a regional planning agency. And I jumped into this race stressing all of the ways an AG can help residents. It is significant. It's not just about law enforcement, it's a policy shop to really deliver opportunity for families. Honored to be here, and I hope to earn your support, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
We, we thank all our candidates for their statements. We're going to ask the audience to hold their applause until closing statements. The order that the questions will be asked will be alternating, and I'll turn it over to our panel.
Thank you. So our questions are garnered from the bar, so it's a lot of different questions. So our first question is to the panelists is this. The role of the Attorney General is to develop policy, direct and administer the work of other attorneys rather than to appear in court. What is your experience in developing and implementing policy and directing the work of other attorneys? We'll start with you, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the only candidate up here who is an actual practicing lawyer, and I am the only one who has run a law firm. This is what I've been doing for 23 years. I've led teams of lawyers in my office and partnered with firms across the country to take on repeated David and Goliath battles and bring victories and get collectively more than $500 million back to working people that was stolen from them by corporate America. Through doing this, I have managed a law firm that has taken in complaints from thousands of working people who call us every day. Through that way, I supervise a staff of attorneys and support staff who take those calls, figure out which cases we can do something about, launch investigations, and take legal action. I am known as one of the most effective lawyers in the country and have not hesitated to take on any powerful interest and have done so victoriously. So I look forward to expanding the work I've done. My moderate-sized law firm, we have achieved some pretty tremendous successes, so I look forward to what we can do with the power of the hundreds of attorneys at the Attorney General's office in all of the areas that the AG's office touches. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Andrea, and I apologize for saying your name
No
incorrectly
problem.
the
Thank
first
you.
time around.
Thank you. I appreciate whoever actually asked that question, because that's one thing I've been stressing on the campaign trail, that this office is more than just the top cop. A recent state trooper used that terminology, and the state trooper is supporting me in the race. But I pushed back and said it's more than that. It is indeed a policy shop. An actual AG doesn't even show up in court. You are directing hundreds of staff and lawyers to do remarkable things to help people. So I've been stressing, what does that look like? I started my career representing children in education cases, pushing for school systems to deliver high-quality education. I also was a part of dismantling the cradle-to-prison pipeline, looking at racial disparities that exist in our education system. I think an AG and the AG's office can be doing a lot more in the context of education and education law than it has in the past. I worked in state government as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick. It was always about putting forth policy. I handled all the transportation agencies for the governor. Clearly, we have work to do with the T. All of the education agencies, all of the transportation agencies, I should say, the Commission Against Discrimination, and I drafted and reviewed Governor Patrick's legislation. All of these tools, of course, critical, especially when you think about the Supreme Court. You're going to want an AG that has crafted legislation, passed it through the State House in order to protect us. And as a local counselor, there may be some who knock that skill set. That legislative skill set is significant. I'm the only candidate on this stage that's worked actually across the aisle with Governor Baker to bring funding into police and public safety agencies in Boston, another tool and skill set that will be significant for the next AG.
Thank you. Move on to Quentin. Same question.
Thanks so much. So I've been a practicing lawyer for 20 years since I graduated from Harvard Law School. I'm the only candidate on the stage who's been an assistant attorney general. And as an assistant attorney general, I led a team of AAGs and founded the healthcare division. I sued predatory health insurance companies that were lying to Massachusetts residents, denying them cancer treatments, and we kicked them out of Massachusetts. I served in the White House under President Barack Obama. I was the lead White House staffer on a major piece of legislation called the America Invents Act. And under the Biden administration, I led a team of 400 lawyers in an agency with 50,000 people in a $12 billion budget. I was responsible on day one of the Biden administration for all of the mess the Trump administration left us with respect to the US Census. This is a really big job. This would be a really hard job to do as your first job in government or as your first job leading government lawyers. As an assistant attorney general, I'll be ready to take on the really big challenges on day one. I won't have to figure out how the office works. I've led lawyers in this office, and I'll be ready.
Thank you. Same question, Jay.
Yes. Let me say this. I'm not a government lawyer. I never have been. I'm a small business owner right now, meaning I have a small law practice. However, I've been in private practice for 35 years. Originally I had 5 lawyers, and I managed that practice. But I have skills and management skills from larger organizations prior to becoming a lawyer. And so I know when going after larger organizations, I know how they work. I know how their policies are developed, and I know some of the good things they do and some of the not so good things they do, and I've sued them because of it. So I've been in private practice. I've had a fair amount of criminal cases. I've started out as a public defender, and I did that for just about 3 years. I learned a lot. I've learned about the respect for the law system. I've learned how sometimes things work and sometimes how things don't work so well, and what to do and what not to do. But in the end, I have had thousands of cases and represented thousands of clients, business corporations, and individuals, and I've done a lot of pro bono work so that I could represent all facets of the population in Massachusetts. I've been just about in every court in every county in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do you see as the role of the Attorney General when a state agency is sued for violating state law? Should the office function merely as a defense attorney for state agencies, or if there's wrongdoing, should it advance the needs of the people of the Commonwealth? We'll start with Jay, since you went last.
All right, very good, thank you. Okay, so my position is the Attorney General determines who the wrongdoers are and then prosecute the wrongdoers. Many times as an Attorney General, I'm going to do something that Maura Healey and all the people, 5 predecessors before her, would not do. I will stand with certain people, certain employees, certain citizens, many times against the government. When I see government overreach or I see malfeasance in office, I won't turn a blind eye to corruption. I'll go after those people. I'll do something that we haven't seen in a long time, an active Attorney General who is actually going after public corruption. Wrongdoing by a state board or agency is corruption, and I will attack it vigorously. So in the end, there may be a situation where they're going to have to get somebody else to defend their wrongdoing. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead with you, Quentin.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So I mentioned that I inherited a lot of the legal issues that Trump left the Biden administration on the census. And I think that the government doesn't need to defend the indefensible. I think a lot of times you can be most helpful in solving the problems in a defensive posture by having a longer view of what the needs of the community are. The climate crisis is a great example of that. We need the Attorney General to move urgently towards renewable sources of energy. We don't just have to defend agencies when they're sued. We need to move urgently towards solutions to the climate crisis. The educational injustice crisis is another example. We may well be failing in our constitutional obligation to provide every child an adequate education. If that's the case, we shouldn't just be defending a broken system. We should be coming up with solutions to try to take that on. I agree completely with Jay. There are going to be times where we're going to need to take on local corruption. I think that's an area where the AG can be a little bit more aggressive. We've had 4 speakers of the House in the last couple of decades go to jail for felonies. We've had too much local corruption. We need the AG to take on those really big challenges. Finally get a handle on the mismanagement and corruption in the state police. Get to the bottom of what's going on at the T. We've got public safety crisis, we've got a civil rights crisis, and we've got mismanagement there. We need an AG who's independent, who can take on those challenges.
Thank you. Same question to you, Andrea.
I agree with Quentin and Jay. I would absolutely be an AG that takes on public corruption. When we were thinking about what is it we wanted to say in an ad with respect to our races, because you can only do 30 seconds, sadly, I mentioned public corruption intentionally, Because as I crisscross this state, that comes up quite a bit, whether it's police misconduct, misappropriation of funds, state employees or others not following their ethical obligations. And so I want to make it clear that I would be an AG to take those on, not just reactively, but also ensure there's a culture within the office to take those issues on proactively. And more directly to your question, no one is above the law. And we say that frequently, but we have to make sure our actions align with it. I care deeply about prison reform, criminal legal reform, juvenile justice. Part of that is because of my personal narrative, and it's a set of issues I would absolutely prioritize. But the Department of Correction is one of those agencies that folks still deem to be a black hole, that is not very transparent, not necessarily accountable. There was a recent report around women and how they're being treated behind the wall, some serious allegations that, of course, need to be looked into. And so I think the AG is uniquely positioned to take on these types of issues. No other state leader can do it. And so you have an obligation as the people's lawyer to put the people's interests first and to remind your office, of course, that you're accountable to the people, and that means taking on state agencies that stand in the way of transparency and accountability and, of course, are breaking the law.
Thank you. And Shannon?
Yes, thank you so much for asking this question. This is an issue that I have been talking about a lot during this race, and that is this. As a civil rights lawyer for more than 20 years fighting in the courts, I have gone up against the state plenty of times, and I've beaten the state. I've beaten the AGs working, the assistant AGs working in the Attorney General's office, and I know that, unfortunately, they haven't always been on the right side of the law. As Attorney General, I will know what every case is that's being litigated in that office, and I will make sure that taxpayer resources are not being used to defend the wrong side of the issue that is not on the side of the people. So, for example, right now I've got a case against the state police for violating our newly enacted state Paid Medical and Family Leave Act. I've taken on the state for the civil service system, which has a discriminatory, disparate impact on black and brown police officers and firefighters, and based on a trial that I won a number of years ago, we got black and brown police and firefighters hired across the Commonwealth. So as Attorney General, I understand that my constitutional role would be to represent and defend the state and its agencies, but part of that job means keeping them out of trouble, making sure that they are complying with our laws in the first place, but in cases where we can't get those kinds of cases resolved, I will appoint a special Attorney General to play the defense role, and I will take the side of the plaintiffs.
Thank you. On to our third question. How will you address the growing problem of employers misclassifying employees as independent contractors, particularly in the gig economy sector? And I think the first question, this will be first to Andrea.
Thank you. Obviously, the recent ballot question that everyone was anticipating and hoping we would vote upon went down in flames, but that means the work continues. I would build upon the leadership of our current AG. Obviously, Maura Healey and her office continue to take on Uber and Lyft and other gig employers in terms of making sure employees are classified appropriately so they get the wages and benefits they're entitled to. I'm really honored to have Maura Healey's endorsement in this race. She knows all of the candidates on this stage quite well and exercised courage to say, I'm going to stand with Andrea Campbell because I think she should be the next Attorney General. And so I think actually you can be more aggressive. Right now the office is focusing, of course, on the gig economy, but this happens in other sectors too, hospitality and other industries as well, where there's misclassification. I remember being on the City Council in Boston. I represented largely Mattapan and Dorchester, some of our poorest communities in the city of Boston. And these were issues that came up in the context of some of our smaller employers. Sometimes I don't think it's immediately wrongdoing. I think it's lack of training, lack of understanding. So where bad actors take them on with maybe smaller businesses or other employers that get it wrong, ask the question, do they know what they're doing? Do they have adequate training? And I think there's a role for the AG's office to play in helping small businesses and local employers actually have that training. And of course, if they don't do the right thing thereafter, of course, to hold them accountable.
Thank you. Quentin, next.
So first, I want to start out by giving a shout out to Shannon, whose leadership on some of these issues was really instrumental in bringing down that ballot initiative, which was a terrible, terrible ballot initiative. One of the first things I put out as a policy statement in this campaign was calling on the legislature to give the AG more power to take on wage theft. Wage theft is $1 billion a year problem. And last year, the AG office recovered about $750,000. The legislature needs to give the AG more power, but even with the existing powers that we have, we can be much more aggressive. And in particular, we need more investigators, and we need to go out into communities and identify circumstances where workers are being misclassified. We, of course, are going to need to continue the litigation against Uber and Lyft and other companies that are trying to misclassify workers. We won a small battle in a much larger war, and the attacks on workers' rights are going to be a really big issue for us moving forward. We also have to fight for a fair share amendment. That's a really big piece of trying to deal with this issue of income inequality. And we also need an attorney general who's independent of some of those big corporations. One of the things that I bring to this race is the ability to take on special interests. Because I'm not taking corporate special interest money in this race, I'm a clean elections candidate, I'm going to have the independence to be able to take on the Walmarts and other kinds of companies that are undermining workers' rights.
Jay?
All right, well, thank you. Okay, so the problem that we have with misclassification of employees is that these employees wind up signing contracts with Uber and Lyft, and these contracts specifically state that they are independent contractors. So in order to find out whether they actually are independent contractors or not, you have to look to the Internal Revenue Code, which tells and makes the differentiation between the type of work they're doing, the type of supervision, whether they can control their own hours, or whether they're directed by corporate people. The people who produce these contracts on behalf of Uber and Lyft are high-paid lawyers. Some of them get as much as $900 an hour to produce these contracts, knowing that they are going all over the country. So everyone in the country who works for Uber or works for Lyft signs a contract that states that they are independent contractors as opposed to employees. So what you're battling is against not only what the contract says, because these are business contracts, they're arm-length business contracts. They're not union contracts. So by being a long-arm contract, the problem is that you have to fight and defeat the fact that they signed up as independent contracts in the beginning.
And Shannon?
Yes, thank you for this question as well. I have devoted the last 15 years of my life to fighting independent contractor misclassification as one of my major challenges. I have been the leading lawyer in the country that originally took on Uber, Lyft, and all the gig economy companies and sparked a national conversation about the importance of these workers having their rights under the employment laws. I developed the law in Massachusetts, which is the strongest law in the country protecting workers from misclassification. We have a special law here in Massachusetts. It's not the IRS test, Jay. And I'm really proud of the fact that I co-founded a coalition to fight back against Uber and Lyft and other gig economy companies who decided to come to Massachusetts and try to buy themselves a carve-out from our laws. I co-founded a coalition, and we successfully kicked it off the ballot this November. But one thing I know from being in hand-to-hand combat with these companies for the last 10 years is that they will be back. I guarantee you they'll be back in 2024 with a new version of this, and it is critical that we have an attorney general who knows how to take them on. I've been in a chess match with these companies for years. I look forward to stepping into Maura Healey's shoes and taking on and expanding and continuing this fight to ensure that these workers have their protections, because it's not just Uber and Lyft drivers we're talking about, it's all employment in America we're talking about if they get away with carving themselves out from our strong protections here in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to question 4. During the public debates regarding police reform, there have been discussions about eliminating the qualified immunity defense in civil actions brought against law enforcement officers. Do you support the elimination of qualified immunity for law enforcement officers? If so, why? And lastly, do you support the elimination of qualified immunity for non-law enforcement government officials? And I believe we'll start with Quentin.
So I don't know if you saw the video earlier this week of 3 officers beating a man who was already prone and defenseless. And under circumstances like that, under circumstances like George Floyd, who was held for 9 minutes, under circumstances like Breonna Taylor, I don't think there should be a special civil defense for police officers. We need to have a justice system that treats people the same, regardless of the color of their skin. I have a 13-year-old son. I'm white. I have never given him the talk that I know that my African-American friends and colleagues give to their 13-year-old sons. And so I think that we need to use the Attorney General's office to push for greater justice and accountability. We need to get a handle on the corruption and mismanagement in the state police. And when there's mismanagement and corruption in our local police forces, it needs to be the AG standing there demanding accountability. Now, I do want to answer the second part of your question, which is I do think that qualified immunity has a role under some circumstances. So, for example, if a firefighter is accused of negligence because they break into somebody's house, break some property, and are in the course of doing their duty, I do think that qualified immunity is appropriate in those circumstances. But violent interactions between law enforcement, I'm sorry, let me finish the sentence, between law enforcement and civilians, I just don't think it's appropriate to have a special civil defense.
Jay?
Thank you. Qualified immunity, for folks in the audience who don't know what that is, that means that a police officer or a first responder, an EMT, firefighter, cannot be sued as long as their actions, which everybody understands is in split seconds, as long as their actions are conducive or in accordance with their training. Now, Quentin gave an example a few moments ago. That's not in people's training. He gave the example of George Floyd. I know a little bit about police training because I've had that training. Part of my job on the Barnstable Police Department I was the guy that drove the paddy wagon. Whenever there was an issue going on, the officers would restrain, we would take the subject and put him in the paddy wagon. No one in Massachusetts is taught to use a chokehold. No one is taught in Massachusetts to put the knee on people's necks. Why they did that 1,500 miles away in Minneapolis is unknown to me and most police officers in Massachusetts. We have not had a death of anyone in police custody in generations, not only in Massachusetts, but not even in New England. So my point in all that is qualified immunity is absolutely necessary for all first responders. And the qualified immunity is just what it says, it's qualified, as long as their actions and conduct are in association with their training and conducted underneath their training. Thank you.
Shannon?
Yes, thank you. So I actually know quite a bit about qualified immunity because for 2 years after I graduated from Harvard Law School, I clerked for a federal judge, and I drafted numerous opinions, legal opinions, including many opinions addressing the issue of qualified immunity. So actually what qualified immunity is, it looks at whether or not the police or other first responder was acting in a reasonable way given the state of the law. In other words, the question is whether or not the actions were reasonable under whether the first responder could reasonably have believed that what they were doing was in accordance with the law. The problem with the way our legal system has developed the qualified immunity doctrine is that courts have gotten lazy and they skip over the first step. So I agree with retired federal judge Nancy Gertner on the problem with qualified immunity, and that is that courts are supposed to decide was the officer's actions legal or not legal, and then if they determine they were not legal, then they have to decide was the law clearly established prior to that point, and they can only go to trial if the law was clearly established and they violated that. The problem is that the courts skip over the first step and then just go straight to the second step and say, oh, well, it wasn't clearly established. But if you don't have courts answering the first question, we don't have enough case law out there to define it so that officers can be trained properly. So I believe in an overhaul of our qualified immunity system, but I think that it's important for police and first responders because we need these people to do their jobs to keep us safe, but we need to make sure that they're acting within the confines of the law, and I will ensure that as Attorney General.
Andrea?
Thank you for the question. I just have to start by saying, I'm a mother of 2 boys, 2 black boys, so I have to have the talk at some point. 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, soon to be a 5 and 3-year-old. God bless my husband and my family. So these issues I pay attention to closely. I absolutely think we have to do away with qualified immunity for police officers. I think it stands in the way of justice and accountability in cases, and there are examples of that. I think if an attorney general is going to step out there and say no one is above the law, then we need to, again, take actions to demonstrate that. I live in Mattapan, which is predominantly a community of color in Boston, and there are many folks who interact with our police officers who speak of bias, who speak of disparities. The judicial system, the same thing. There's an attorney right now in the AG's office working on the Springfield police misconduct case. There are many layers there, whereas it wasn't just, say, a district attorney's office or the lawyers involved in the case, the police department, maybe local government, the judiciary. There are many layers to why people do not get the justice and accountability they deserve. And this is one issue that stands in the way of that accountability and that justice. And so if we say we're serious about really doing away with racial disparities in our system and delivering justice and accountability, especially for communities of color, then we should do away with qualified immunity in the context of police.
May I respond to the 3?
No rebuttals.
Okay.
Thank you. For our next question, as Attorney General, what would you do to build a trusting relationship with BIPOC and immigrant communities who have often been targeted by aggressive law enforcement strategies? We'll start with you, Shannon.
Okay, well, so thank you. I believe that there's a lot of work that we need to do to reform our criminal justice system. I think we have spent too much time and energy and resources in trying to prosecute our way out of issues like mental health issues, addiction, and poverty. So I believe we need to be focused on getting resources to people who need that help. I'm very proud and honored to have the endorsement in this race of several DAs, including DA Morrissey, DA Blodgett, and DA Sullivan. So I would work with them and other sitting DAs to make sure that we are focusing our efforts on getting people help who need it. I think it's important that juveniles have the opportunity to go into diversion programs so that they don't have to get their records messed up at a young age, when they can be put in a direction where they can be getting training and furthering their education and have an alternative to going into the criminal justice system. I think we need to raise the age in which people have to enter the adult criminal justice system so that 18 to 21-year-olds can stay in the juvenile system. I think that our country's very problematic war on drugs has had an enormous effect on BIPOC communities, and we need to make sure that we are making all efforts to expunge records for people who have records from marijuana possession and other drug possession offenses. So I will work closely with DAs to make sure that we're moving in the right direction to make sure that communities are not affected by disparate prosecutions. That's the kind of work I've been doing as a civil rights lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to you, Jay.
Could I have the question again, please?
Yes, as Attorney General, what would you do to build a trusting relationship with BIPOC and immigrant communities who have often been targeted by aggressive law enforcement strategies?
Well, I disagree with the premise that minority communities are disproportionately affected by aggressive law enforcement, because my discussions with minority community leaders are that there's not enough police in their community. People in the city of Boston are screaming for more help from the police. We got deaths every other day from illegal guns in the city of Boston. Those minority communities want those guns removed from their streets. And to say that there's aggressive law enforcement actions is a misnomer. There's not enough government action, not enough police actions in those communities. To me, we're not going to defund the police. We're going to encourage and incorporate more police in those troubled neighborhoods. The citizens of those neighborhoods deserve better public safety than what they're getting now, but they will get a fair allocation of resources when I become the next Attorney General.
Same question to you, Andrea.
Well, one, I will start with, I'm not sure what troubled neighborhoods Jay is referencing. I live in Mattapan. I don't view it as a troubled neighborhood. It has disparities, of course, but it's a beautiful neighborhood with folks who work hard to put their children through school and college, who work 2 or 3 jobs to make sure their families are fed and that the next generation does better than the last. I think a few things. One, you got to be intentional. So you got to show up in communities, and you have to reach out to organizational leaders and folks on the ground. And I'll give you one example. I've obviously shown up in communities of color, rural communities. Geographical diversity is also important. Regional equity is also important. But even reaching out to our tribes, our Native American tribes. I was on the Zoom conversation with one, Aquina. I was the only AG candidate that had reached out to have a conversation about this race and their issues. And she named that. And so you have to, one, be intentional about showing up and having conversation and looking to work in partnership. In the context of public safety, communities of color are often over-policed and under-protected. So yes, get us resources into our various communities to make sure that when someone calls 911 when there is a murder, the police actually show up on time. That's why I worked across the aisle with Governor Baker to bring in resources into the police department in Boston and other public safety agencies to improve our community policing. But at the same time, I was also crafting legislation to create the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency to deal with the racial disparities, the lack of transparency and accountability that does exist in certain policing models. You can have both. Fully resourced departments that are accountable, diverse, and transparent to the people.
Thank you. Quentin?
So the war on drugs has been an epic failure. Over the last couple of decades, we've seen our prison populations grow. We've seen huge racial disparities in terms of who ends up in the criminal justice system. We can't arrest and incarcerate our way out of problems that are primarily about mental health, substance use disorder, unstable housing. We've got to take on those challenges head on and think about structural inequality and racial disparities across our economy and society. But as the Attorney General, I want to take the lead on criminal justice reform. And one piece of that is to stop criminalizing poverty. We got to get cash bail out of the system. We have too many fees. Too many people end up in jail pre-trial for too long. We need to do a better job of disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline. Too often, kids who are at risk end up getting more and more discipline as opposed to more and more resources to make sure that they have opportunities in life. We need to do a better job of overseeing the corrections system. I hear stories about mistreatment of people in the Department of Corrections facilities that are really concerning. We need to do a better job of investing in reentry programs, in prisoner education programs, and mental health services. And I'm going to dedicate a unit or a dedicated set of personnel within the Attorney General's office to be able to oversee concerns and complaints there. Prisoners ought to have free phone calls, which got blocked at the end by the legislature, and we ought to do a better job of making sure that people who are incarcerated can vote.
Thank you. So for our next question, so while an increasing number of district attorneys' offices have established conviction integrity units to ensure that innocent people have not been wrongly convicted of crimes, the AG's conviction integrity unit only reviews convictions in cases that were prosecuted by the AG's office. Given the statewide reach of problems that we've seen with crime labs and drug labs and the Office of Alcohol Testing and the thousands of convictions that have been thrown out as a result, would you, as Attorney General, be in favor of increasing the scope of the conviction integrity unit's focus to address some of the more systemic failures that affect the entire state and not just a particular county? We'll start with you, Jay.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I'm in favor of cooperation with the Innocent Project. I am, if attorneys bring to my attention that someone in the, a case that was prosecuted in the Attorney General's office, that there was a wrongful conviction, I would certainly look at that. I would certainly look at all the evidence. But, you know, we missed the point that the President Attorney General, it was under her watch that we had problems in both drug labs. We had Western Massachusetts with Sonia Farak, and we had Eastern Massachusetts with Annie Dukin. And there were tremendous wrongdoing and misrepresentation made to the court by officers in the Attorney General's office. Now, that's the thing that I think I would go after and prosecute, because people who make misrepresentations to the court and cause American citizens to be incarcerated on evidence wrongly gathered or otherwise, or tampered with, those are the people who deserve the severest prosecution. And we have two people that were in the current Attorney General's office now. They were making 5-figure incomes. You would think that if they committed what they committed, that they would wind up being fired. They weren't fired. You'd think they'd been disbarred. They weren't disbarred. They were promoted. They're now getting 6-figure incomes in the state government. To me, I'd put an end to that. Maura Healey did not do that. And by the way, she did not prosecute any state troopers. Those were done by Andrew Lelling, the U.S. Attorney.
Thank you. Andrea, same question.
I would absolutely expand that unit, and for a few reasons. One, like you remarked, some district attorney's offices have them. They have the resources to be able to have these types of units to review cases. Suffolk County, where I live, is one such county that has this. I think every district attorney's office should have access to these type of resources. And if an AG's office can provide that, given your state purview and your state platform, you should. I also know that many advocates, many folks, whether it's public defenders, many stakeholders have been asking the AG's office to expand that unit to include more cases and to investigate more cases where there is wrongdoing, or where a district attorney either doesn't have the office or doesn't have the resources to do it, or where you need greater independence from the district attorney's office to be able to do an adequate investigation. So I think absolutely expand it, include more resources, as well, so that you can actually have the results, the systemic results that the community and the people want to see.
Quentin?
Yeah, I would absolutely extend the conviction integrity mandate of the Attorney General's office to take on those cases. We ought to get to the bottom of some of how the crime lab scandals came about and make sure that we do right by those people. It's one of the reasons why I'm so strongly opposed to the death penalty, because of that irreversible nature of it. But I want to mention one other proposal we've made, which is the creation of a statewide Brady list here in Massachusetts. So some other states have, at the state attorney general level, a list of exculpatory evidence that you can turn over to criminal defendants to make sure that they are aware of circumstances when a law enforcement officer has been accused of tampering with evidence or of being dishonest. In Massachusetts at the moment, we don't have that at a statewide level. And what that means is that different district attorneys collect that information in different ways. When law enforcement officers move from one jurisdiction to the next, it isn't always available. And there are really big differences in terms of the public's ability to know when somebody in law enforcement has been accused of fabricating evidence or of dishonesty. So what we ought to do is do what New Hampshire does, which is, we need the legislature for this, but create a statewide Brady list, a statewide registry, put it within the Attorney General's office, and that would allow us to make sure that we're handling exculpatory evidence in a much more systematic, fair, and transparent way.
Thank you. Shannon?
Yes, so to answer your question, I do think it is appropriate and it is very important for the Attorney General's office to take on the oversight of considering the integrity of convictions that have occurred across Massachusetts. The drug lab scandals were scandalous for Massachusetts, and that was an example of where the Attorney General's office was not on the right side. They were defending some pretty heinous activity that happened in these drug lab scandals, and the ACLU did a really outstanding job of getting justice at the SJC and getting many defendants released from prison as a result of their wrongful convictions. Now, what I've been in talks with the ACLU for a long time about doing is how do we get remediation and compensation for all of those people who are wrongfully incarcerated and those people who still have Mars on their criminal records based on the drug lab scandals. I think it is imperative that we make compensation available for people who suffer from wrongful convictions and wrongful prosecutions, and we have a system now that makes it very difficult for people to get there. There's been a settlement recently in which those who were impacted by the drug lab scandals can get refunds of fines that they paid, but that's nothing compared to what they've suffered. And as Attorney General, I would look into overseeing a way to get real compensation for people who've been harmed by the state's actions.
Thank you. I get to ask the last question before you do closing statements. The Attorney General office is more than the criminal arm enforcement of our state. It also deals with a lot of civil cases that many of our population are not aware of, particularly here in central Massachusetts, where we don't have the amount of resources that Suffolk County may have. So our question is, as Attorney General, what would you do to develop trusting relationships with underserved population, including BIPOC and immigrant communities, so that they understand they are protected as well within their civil rights? And we'll start with you, Quentin.
Well, thanks so much for this question. As a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen how this works in the office, and I think it can work a lot better. I think one of the things that we can do a lot better is make sure that we're in touch with every community. And I mean that geographically. I don't think we spend enough time here in Worcester County. I mean that in terms of language minorities. I mean that in terms of communities of color. In the bad old days, the Attorney General's office used to just handle cases that came to us. That's not where the people who need the services most are able to get. And so we need to do a better job of being out in every community. We also need to do a better job of making sure that the office reflects the diversity of the state. This needs to be at the leadership level, and of course I don't represent that kind of diversity, but I'm deeply committed to making sure that my leadership team represents the diversity of the Commonwealth and is deeply engaged with every community. And it also means the pipeline, making sure that entry-level assistant attorneys general and non-lawyer staff represent that kind of diversity. We need to make sure that we're in touch with all communities. We also need to do a better job of engaging with our immigrant communities. I'm a proud alum of both the Obama and Biden administrations, but I think our immigration policies have been too harsh even in Democratic administrations. We need to pass the Safe Communities Act. We need to make it clear that we are not going to cooperate between law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. And we have, sorry, let me finish one thought. I apologize. We do have an obligation in the Attorney General's office as we enforce the Moving to Opportunity Act to make sure that we keep those records private and make sure that they cannot be used for immigration purposes.
Thank you. Shannon?
Yes, thank you. As a civil rights lawyer for the last 23 years, I have prosecuted systemic discrimination cases, and I have worked hard to work with immigrant communities. I've worked with worker centers. I've worked with workers' rights groups to stand up for immigrant workers who have particularly been taken advantage of by their employers, who think that they can take advantage of them because they hold this leverage over them that they're not going to stand up and complain. So I've taken on janitorial companies that have scammed immigrant workers, charging them thousands of dollars for jobs. I went to the SJC and got that declared illegal in Massachusetts. I've taken on discrimination cases, getting companies to hire non-white employees for the first time and then have to report their hiring. I think there's a lot more that can be done in the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office to directly take on discrimination work. Right now, much of the discrimination work in the Commonwealth goes on at the MCAD, which just doesn't have the resources and the ability to take on these systemic issues like we can do at the Attorney General's office. And in terms of geographic diversity, one of the main things that I've been hearing as I've been traveling around during this campaign is the importance of the AG's office being present in there in all reaches of the Commonwealth. We now have outposts here in Worcester and in Springfield and New Bedford of the AG's office. I would keep those and look into expanding further outposts so that the people of Massachusetts can walk into the AG's office. It's their law firm. It's your law firm. It's the people's law firm. And as Attorney General, I will be sure that we are there for all of the residents of Massachusetts.
Andrea?
I think it goes back to the previous question. One, be intentional and show up. I'm really proud that when we launched the campaign back in February, seems so long ago, we kicked it off in Boston. but we immediately, the same day, came to Worcester, and then we went to Springfield. And so you have to, one, show up. I think the second piece that is critical is right now the AG's office is not accessible to many people. We're such a Boston-centric state, you have to either go to Boston to get some services or you're unaware of the regional offices that exist in your community. So I think we need to strengthen those regional offices. We have one in Springfield, New Bedford, Worcester, but I've been in Worcester several times, and I bet you even folks in this room don't know where their regional office is, who's the lawyer there, who staffs it. So there's a way to strengthen it. I think you have to hire folks from the community that speak different languages, that are culturally competent to staff those offices. But you can also be creative. I was just in Lawrence, which is predominantly a community of color, immigrant community, Latino and Latinx community. They used to have a position funded at one of their community-based organizations by the AG's office to help the thousands of residents that this organization works with. Bring that position back and fund other organizational positions around the state in key communities that can really be on the ground to help residents in their needs. Berkshire County, true Western Mass, they really feel out of reach, so I think we also have to look at where we place regional offices, where we establish these positions. And then lastly, diversify the office, I think, is also really important. If you have folks in the office with lived experience, whether it's immigrant experience, coming here as a new arrival, whether it's also being a person of color, someone formerly incarcerated, someone who's struggled with substance use disorder, I'm gonna surround myself with those folks who are experts, not just on commissions and advisory boards, but hire them to be a part of the conversation so we're truly creating policy to help residents on the ground.
Thank you. Jay?
I'll tell you what, I ran for this office 4 years ago. Most of you know that. I came in second. This time I'm running. I've been everywhere in the state. I've been to every city and town, all 351. I talk with people in those communities. Almost every community, someone inevitably comes up to me and says, do you know what's going on in this town, or do you know what's going on in this city? And they will tell me a tale of corruption that they said is so obvious. And I will always ask, did you call the police? Have you told the police? Have you talked to the chief of police? A lot of times they'll say, we have. They said there's nothing they can do about it, or they know about it and just say, we're taking care of it, we'll handle it. Then I say, well, did you go to the district attorney? Yes, they say it's outside their jurisdiction. Did you call the attorney general? And most of them, who I've told them that, pull out a letter. I've seen dozens of these letters. It's a Xerox letter, but their name and address is typed in, and it comes in a window envelope, and even the signature on it is a Xerox signature. But it says from the attorney general's office, Maura Healey's office, and it says, we have considered your matter and found it lacking in merit. We suggest you contact your local police or the district attorney's office. I call it the get lost letter. I will not send out a get lost letter to anyone who reports crime to me. We will investigate it. We will meet with people in local communities, and we will find out and call in that information to address those concerns.
Thank you. This concludes our question part of our forum, and we're going to move to closing statements. And because I do not remember the order we started, we're going to make this a lot easier. And Shannon, we're just going to start with you, and then followed by Andrea, Quentin, and then Jay. So Shannon, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation tonight. It's been such a pleasure to be here. I think it has been clear during this race and during the debate tonight who is the most experienced lawyer here on this stage running to be your lawyer, the people's lawyer. I have more than 23 years experience fighting and winning in court, developing the law case by case to strengthen protections for working people. And I want you to ask all of the candidates, as you're making your choices about who you're going to support in this race, how long have each of us done the jobs that we're touting as part of our experience and why we're qualified to be in this position? I am the only practicing lawyer on the Democrat side on this stage. I am the only one who has run a law firm. I am so proud in this race to have the endorsement of the Massachusetts AFL-CIO and more than 50 individual labor unions, including the Mass Teachers Association, the Mass Nurses Association, Association, the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts, and many more. They collectively represent more than 500,000 working people across Massachusetts. I am so excited to be able to use my skills, my experience, my persistence, and my passion to address all of the issues that the Attorney General's office must take on: consumer protection, health care, environmental rights, right to abortion access. My work in the courts in figuring out legal strategies that will win against the most powerful interests are going to be the best protection that we have of our rights here in Massachusetts. I would be so honored to have your support. It would be my honor to serve as your next Attorney General, so I humbly ask for your vote on or before September 6th. Thank you all so much for having me tonight.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, of course, to our audience, to the organizers who brought this together, to our panelists and moderator. Thank you very much. I consider it an honor and a privilege to be a candidate for Attorney General in this moment in time. Given what's happening at the Supreme Court, the uptick in hate crimes that we're seeing, discrimination, racial disparities, the distrust that residents feel for government, and this idea that government can't help them, I have been going out there and saying a couple of things, because we're not running a doom and gloom campaign. We're running one of hope, joy, and optimism. Why? There are great candidates in this race, but there are major distinctions about my candidacy. The number one thing I've been stressing to folks is that we live in the best state in the nation, and that government, especially the Attorney General's office, can indeed help residents and small business owners with a whole host of the struggles and concerns they have on a daily basis. And how do I know we live in the best state in the nation? I am living proof. I'm living proof that a girl who grew up in public housing with a family torn apart by such poverty, trauma, and incarceration could go off to become the first in her family to go to college and law school. This state afforded me those opportunities. It can do it for other families. And I firmly believe an AG is uniquely positioned to help families and to do it in a more intersectional approach. Unlike the governor that has to manage a whole bunch of departments and agencies and try to get them going in the same direction, an AG has all the bureaus, the division, the talent, the staff, the resources to help every family have access to health care, behavioral health services, mental health services, housing that is suitable, that is affordable, can absolutely protect our constitutional rights as the Supreme Court goes backwards, can make sure the neighborhoods in which we live are safe and prepared for the next climate event or the next pandemic, and so much more. A public servant, that's what I've been most of my life, and it's always been about making sure the next generation does better than the last. And I want to do that for every resident in Massachusetts. I hope to earn your support and your vote the day after Labor Day. Plan your party, plan to get out and vote the day after Labor Day, and thank you again to the organizers for having me and for hosting this incredible conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much to the organizers. Thanks, Shannon, Andrea, Jay. Our democracy is literally under attack. An armed mob stormed the Capitol to try to disrupt the peaceful transition of power. I've spent a good deal of my career working on this issue. I led a team of about 4,000 lawyers for Obama in Ohio. I founded a national voter protection organization called the Voter Protection Corps. And as we think about the challenges we face in our democracy, one of the biggest challenges we face is corporate money in our elections. Since Citizens United, corporate money is flooded into our elections. It undermines our ability to take on the really big challenges like the climate crisis, like gun violence. And it's one of the reasons why I've emphasized the importance of keeping corporate money out of this race. I called on my opponents to sign the People's Pledge, and it really matters whether you have corporate special interest money funding these campaigns. Because if you want an attorney general who's going to take on the Walmarts, the Bain Capitals, the charter school backers, the for-profit healthcare companies, you can't also have super PACs supporting those candidates through those vehicles. There are really big differences in this race. I'm proud to have the support of the Democratic Party, of Progressive Mass, Progressive Dems of Mass, Our Revolution, the Sierra Club, Stonewall Dems. There are big differences on single-payer health care, on safe injection sites, on charter schools, on fare-free transit, on what we do about the T, on police accountability, and about rent control. But the biggest difference is around clean elections. And I promise you that if I'm your Attorney General, if I have the great honor to be your Attorney General, I'm going to take on special interests. I'm going to stand up for health care as a human right, for an economy that works for everyone, for urgent action on the climate crisis, on abortion rights, on gun violence, on racial justice, because that's what the people's lawyer does. And that's the kind of Attorney General that I'm going to be. I'm Quentin Palfrey. I'd be honored to have your support. Please join our grassroots campaign at QuentinPalfrey.com, and thank you so much for coming out here today.
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure to be with my three opponents. And I just want you to know that with my 35 years of experience in every level of court where the Attorney General's office practices, I am the most experienced candidate for you. I want to say that I believe that our constitutions grant all groups to protest what they believe are extreme grievances against the government and society as a whole. Nonetheless, those protests must be peaceful in accordance with public order. I don't believe that any one group should be excused by their grievances as perceived to be higher moral value than others, and therefore death and destruction as part of their protests are an acceptable way of expression. I will prosecute that criminal behavior. I will not dismiss it as, yes, I know American cities are burning, but that's how forests grow. If you want to see something about corruption in the Attorney General's office, I advise you to look at Netflix and go to How to Fix a Drug Scandal. That's How to Fix a Drug Scandal. It's very enlightening in the current AG's office under Maura Healey. As your next Attorney General, I will not be pushing a political agenda. However, I will uphold and enforce all our laws. I will support and encourage all our police and first responders. I will back them with necessary resources in order to keep our citizens safe. If we find rogue police officers in our midst, we will prosecute them like any other person with criminal intent. By the way, and at the end of the day, I back the blue. I'm asking you to go to my website, attorneyjmcmahon.com, find out my three-point plan for fighting the opiate crisis. We didn't really touch it, but I want you to go there and look. That's attorneyjmcmahon.com. I'm Jay McMahon. I'm running to be your next Massachusetts Attorney General, and I thank you for listening, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come out here. Please. It is not easy to be in your shoes. It's not easy, all the work that you do. We thank you for taking that brave step to see who will be our next Attorney General. September 6th. If you're going to be away, you can ask for a mail-in ballot. You can vote early. So please go ahead. They already sent it. But the polls open August 28th. You can start voting early. Please vote. It is important. It is important who's going to represent us here in Central Massachusetts. It is important for us as members of the bars, as people who live here and reside here. Our candidates, if they have the time, they will spend a few moments outside. There's some beverages, there's some food. Really want to thank again our Bar Association for working with us, Quinsigamond Community College, particularly Bibiana Abreu-Hernandez for all of the amazing work that her and her team did to put this together. I want to thank again our amazing panelists for helping us, making sure that we gather all the questions, and then our timekeeper. Thank you, Kevin. It's not easy being the person with the time. Thank you again for our audience for caring about our civic process, and thank you to each and one of you. You may clap now.